Yes, pertinent question. In fact, I really want to argue in reversal of your question. Basically, history of India shows that history of India with regard to conversion shows that the Christians who came to India in the first century AD itself, the very disciple of Christ, Thomas, who died here in Chennai, he was always converting only the Brahmins, not others, not everybody. He started with the Brahmins, and also except for few, say the rulers of Patiala, Thomas has converted only the Brahmins. So that means Brahmins, in fact, that is the highly mobile group. It's a very highly mobile group. Where they always align with the power. That has been their element. And the Christians who came to India also did not bother about the lower caste. Because if you start, see their modus operandi of conversion is, you convert the king, subjects will follow. So they are looking for the people who are at the high positions in the society. If you convert him, the others also will follow. But it did not happen. What all was, he went to Kerala, convert the Nambudris. He came to Chennai. He wanted to convert the Ayyar Saingars, but they killed him and he died. After, right from St. Thomas, nearly 17 centuries, the Christian missionaries have only been converting the upper caste, not lower caste. William Carey, you are talking about, maybe he is a cobbler, that the differentiation doesn't happen. They are maybe carpenters, whatever, that problem is not there, social discrimination not there. He also started converting the upper caste. Even Andhra Pradesh or even Tamil Nadu also, initial Christian, institutions, they were open only for the upper caste, not for the lower caste. So basically, this has been the situation. Brahma Samaj, as you said, like the Brahma Samaj and all, though they were in fact, initially they want to stop the conversion to Christianity, but they want the benefits of the colonialism. So that is why there was a kind of a seesaw movement with them. Rajaram Mohan Rai was supporting the British, but with certain these things. So they want to revive that's why they take up the reform of so-called Hinduism. So the reform which they talked about is also upper caste reform. Because the Christians that time, they were attacking the problems within the Brahminical Hinduism, the Gauri, the traditions of Sati, forceful widowhood, all these things. They were only among the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. So, the kind of a reform movement that Rajaram Mohan Rai has taken, it is basically a Brahminical reform. The problems have not been there among the majority people of this country. So therefore, they started that. Later on, as you said, Keshav Chandra Sen, he has become so egoistic, and in fact, he wanted to start his own religion. Keshav Chandra Sen, in fact, he was talking about he has performed so many marriages, non-Hindu, non-Brahmin marriages. But he himself has given his daughter to a Brahmin, performed it in the Brahminical rites. He was criticized for a long time because of that particular incident. But later on, he said, I am the new Christ. This is the new, that is some kind of a megalomaniac formations he had. But all said and done, everybody was opposed to those kind of conversions. Initially, when upper caste are converting, upper caste are few, and they were dealing with, suppose take the case of Bengal, the first matriculate, first graduate, first PhD, all are from the Bengal. They are all beneficiaries of the British institutions. So many of them have been anglicized and also got Christianized. But the problem came up when the lower caste started converting into Christianity. They do not want the lower caste to take the benefits of Christianity. And the first opponent to Christian conversion is not Hindu Mahasabha but Gandhi. In Young India and even Harijan, Gandhi was writing, I was quoting Ambedkar Sar's thing, probably you know the difference. Gandhi is saying that, I am quoting, the untouchables are no different from a cow. is comparing this with the animal. They do not have their own individual thinking. And these conversions into Christianity, I say, they are not conversions of heart, they are conversions of convenience. These are the words by Gandhi. They sound like an RSS listener. Gandhi was saying these things. He was writing them in the origin. He is saying that untouchables are no more than animals. They cannot think on their own. You cannot expect any kind of a, say, inhuman attitude towards a vast majority of people. He is saying that they are like animals, they can't understand, and these people, missionaries, they are converting them as conversions of convenience, not conversions of heart. So he was opposing those things. Why? Because by that time, this is by in fact 1840s, during 1840s and 50s, it was the only time slowly the lower castes are getting converted. Why? Because some of the lower castes, they fought with the East Indian Company as soldiers. Because East Indian Company is a trade company, it came for business. Suddenly they start fighting wars. So who helped them was only the lower caste and the scheduled caste and other people now. So for giving, and those people who could write and then talk, they started writing letters to the crown that time. So when they were writing letters to the crown, the British government took a resolution that conversion can also take place among the lower castes. Till such time, missionaries were not allowed to convert the lower caste. As a rule, British rule. Their rule was only to convert the rulers. After some days, subjects automatically follow. And that's why you have so many people, they started donning the sacred thread. Many Christian missionaries, they started wearing sacred thread. 5 threads used to be there. They said 3 threads are the Father, Son and the Holy Spirit. Fourth is the real the 5th Veda. They want to give a 5th Veda. The Bible, they call it as a 5th Veda. And they also 5th thread is for the congregation. All these mockery they have done. All these kind of thing they have done. But when these movements have been taking place, when these people, in fact, they started the British establishment, they are demanding. So the British has changed their, ruling that missionaries can convert the lower caste. And that is why in 1842, first conversion of the lower caste took place in Tamil Nadu in Nagarkoil. And after that, the Lutheran mission came in 1840s. Then came the Canadian Baptist mission. Then came the American Baptist mission. Then before these things, there was 60s or so. There is a London Mission Society was there. So if you go into this kind of a Christian history, originally they converted only the upper caste. Later on, they started doing the lower caste. It is otherwise happened to the Brahma Samaj thing. Brahma Samaj, as you said, yes, they want to retain the so-called quote-unquote Hindu values. In fact, they wanted to call all people as Brahmo. The suffix, Satyapal Brahmo. So I'll go to the temple, make these people as bhajans. In fact, in 1906, in Hyderabad, when the scheduled caste, in fact, they want to come out of this so-called oppressive Hinduism, they started certain organization called as Jagan Mitra Mandali, and then Hindu Swasti Dala, and then Adi Hindu Mahasabha, 1912, and then by 1917 they were into Brahma Samaj, basically. They were doing their own bhajans and all, the so-called Hindu things. So, as you said, it is definitely to stall the progress of Christianity, but at the same time, the Brahma Samaj leaders themselves were, going in for Christianism. But Kesav Chandra Sen is an exception. He was seen even by Brahma Samaj people as an eccentric people. He has become kind of a megalomaniac later on. He was an exception, basically.
Even Anni Besant, she also accumulated with the Brahma Samaj.
Anni Besant basically, he was she assailed with the Brahmins, and she is against the education of lower caste. What should I say? Everybody knows about this particular thing. I think so. The less we talk about her is better for us. Sir.
Two questions,
Sir. Sir. I'm sorry.
Your lecture is very enlightening and I have 2 questions.
Yes.
One, and what extent this nationalism perspective can be seen in a theoretical angle. That is, in the nationalist, it is seen as a nationalist as a last resort of communals.
Yes.
And similarly, what I think this is a liberal democratic perspective, seeing a nationalist feeling. But what about other progressive or socialist perspective of uniting or the struggling mass? That is, we need to see that angle as well. One, and what extent today this nationalistic feeling or nationalism works in the globalized world and a globalized and liberalized economy. That is very important to understand in this context. Thank you.
Doctor, you come here, doctor. You come down here. Arey, come on. That's a fully loaded question, I know. because the organization which I work, as you know, also talks about a kind of a nationalism. See, we are talking about a kind of a cultural nationalism. Cultural nationalism has been looked about as a kind of a retrospective, a kind of a thing which takes you back to medieval traditional this thing and all. So-called nationalism which they talk about, in fact, the Hindu nationalism which everybody is talking about, that really its own, by its own aim, they are being traditional, they are a status quo thing, and even in the so-called globalized world, they want to retain the same position. These days people are talking about techno-cultural Hindu nationalism. I have come across this kind of a fancy word, techno-cultural Hindu nationalism, because several say hybrid formation have been taken up. See, for a Hindu nationalist feelings, how they have been using the latest the so-called globalized technologies, how they are pooling the resources, how they are conveying their information. So this so-called techno-cultural Hindu nationalism, obviously, it is a divisive kind of a program. Anything which talks about the so-called Hindu or Brahmin, this thing is a divisive thing. But we are looking to a kind of a nationalism which unites people. So, in the parlance of BAMSEF, as you also very recently brushed with, BAMSEF talks about Mool Nivasi nationalism. Because we are also, in fact, Mool Nivasi nationalism, basically it is posed to counter this kind of a thing. But as an academic, I am still trying to theorize that. Because in the academic parlance, we will have to see many things to it. To run a social movement with those things as an activist is a different kind of a thing. Like in a sense, you can say exactly the opposite. See, the cultural nationalism of the Hindu nationalism is artificial, it is divisive, it is retrospective, retrogressive. All these things we can argue, it's right. And we say Mool Nivasi nationalism, basically it blurs the caste identities, it blurs the all other identities and all. It takes us back to our own the proto-democratic Indus civilization, as the claimants of those civilization, as the proto-democratic people, as the people who has in fact evolved the urban grandeur and all. That really basically is a like kind of a historical unifying. In fact, it creates a kind of a self-respect. So it's a unifying cultural nationalism. True. But when we talk about the academic parlance, there are problems of theorizing it. I really agree with your this thing. Second point you talk about, in the aspect of global and local thing and all. Sir, basically, it is local which is going global. In India, what's happening is, it is local which is going global. It is not the global coming to the local. In all aspects. In all aspects. You want to see your own culture, you want to see your temple in Houston, you want to see your this thing, you want to see my idli and so thing, maybe some Chinese thing here. So I want to see my localized thing, go about the boundaries, but thing in India, global thing has not come up. Both in economic aspects as well as in other political formulations. See, they say a global village basically, like in the sense, everybody is an equal partner. Economically, are we an equal partner? Never. We are not an equal partner. So that globalization has not come over.